and thanks for tuning in to another episode of All Out Nevada, your go-to podcast for insightful glimpses into the Nevada judiciary. I'm your host, Seth Easley, representing Supreme Court Nevada Administrative Office of the Courts. Today, we're stepping a little outside of the courtroom to discuss the Advisory Council for Prosecuting Attorneys, what it is, why it was created, and what it does. Joining me in the studio to discuss this is Michael Morton, Special Assistant Attorney General. Mike, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Seth. Happy to be here.
So one of your roles at the Attorney General's office is serving as Executive Director of the Advisory Council for Prosecuting Attorneys. For listeners who may not be familiar with that council, can you start just by explaining what it is and why it exists?
Sure. So the Advisory Council for Prosecuting Attorneys was created by the Nevada legislature in 1997. And the Advisory Council is made up of 7 individuals: the Attorney General, 3 district attorneys, 2 city attorneys, and 1 law enforcement representative. So any sworn peace officer who is employed by the state or one of the localities here in Nevada. And the Advisory Council was created to provide the state with expertise when it comes to prosecutorial decisions that are made in Nevada, how prosecutions should be administered statewide in any courtroom, urban or rural, and to provide the legislature with some expertise when it comes to criminal justice matters.
Okay, so you mentioned kind of why it was created. So was there a specific gap or incident or something that kind of prompted its creation in 1997?
There was no specific incident per se, but it was created by, it was the bill that created the Advisory Council, was sponsored by former State Senator Bill Raggio, longtime state senator here in Nevada, but also probably more well known for being a longtime Washoe County District Attorney. So he was a prosecutor himself for for his entire career. And, as probably many of the listeners to this podcast know, Nevada is a very unique state. It's a very large state with, some very large urban areas, but also very many, sprawling rural areas and very remote parts of the state. And so the way prosecutions happen, whether you're in, urban Clark County or, up in Jiggs, Nevada, could look very different for a couple of reasons. The experience of the attorneys who live in those areas. Even today, there's a lot of areas in Nevada that maybe don't have any attorneys,
right? And
so the state wanted to create a body that was sort of able to guide all of the jurisdictions of the state, so that no matter where a resident of Nevada lived, they were experiencing the fair administration of justice, whether you are, a defendant or a victim or just a member of the general public.
Okay. So in preparing for this, I've seen you refer to Nevada's legislature as a true citizen legislature. So what does that mean to you? And how does that structure shape the way criminal and civil laws are developed in the state?
Sure. So the legislature, is a true part-time legislature, is only meeting 120 days every other year.
Right.
All of the elected officials over at the legislature have full-time jobs. So they are, some of them may be attorneys, they're small business owners, plumbers, electricians, teachers. And so no matter what topic or bill or policy that they may be debating in the legislature, it's, nearly impossible or very rare that all 63 of them are going to be subject matter experts in that specific policy.
Right.
And that's true for, criminal justice matters. And so the Advisory Council is really there to serve as sort of, expert help for the legislature, specifically the judiciary committees in both houses, when they are, debating bills and policy related to criminal justice.
Right. Okay. So with this structure, this citizen legislature, you can see why practitioner input is especially important in the system, saying you can't expect everyone in the legislature to be subject matter experts in all the bills that they're working on or considering. So how does the Advisory Council function as a resource for legislators who may not have the background?
Sure. So I serve as the executive director of the Advisory Council. and as the advisory council is really the sole full-time staff member. And so my job is to, one, act as a liaison between the legislature and the advisory council. And so sometimes we will get requests for some information from legislators or legislative staff wanting to know maybe how, a specific type of prosecution works, maybe, related to, domestic violence convictions, or how sentencing works for, habitual offenders and things like that. And rather than them try to find that out themselves, that sort of data is readily available to both the Attorney General's office and all of the local district attorney's offices. And so, I'll aggregate that data for the legislature and provide it to them. Another way that we assist the legislature is once bills start getting published right before legislative session, we'll offer our input on how a bill might practically affect court administration, or how a bill may increase or decrease the amount of prosecutions that may be happening related to a specific topic.
Okay, that's interesting. So one of the council's core responsibilities is coordinating proposed legislation. So how do issues from day-to-day prosecution work actually rise to the level of legislative consideration?
Sure. And so very different from the legislature meeting 120 days every other year, prosecutions in this state are happening, every day. Right. Courts are meeting every day across Nevada. And so, and every case is just that. It's one case. Every case is different. And the facts and circumstances of every case are different, but there happen to be trends. And so when our line prosecutors who are in court every day, we'll see them experiencing maybe the same thing over and over again. And they all might be experiencing, a certain roadblock, an evidentiary roadblock, or new technology that is out in the world may be causing, problems or opportunities that we've never seen before. And so those line prosecutors will talk to their district attorneys or their city attorneys, who then might bring that issue up at an advisory council meeting, and we'll use that experience and the data that we're collecting from those types of cases to go to the legislature and propose a piece of legislation, maybe to fix a problem that has come up recently, or to create state law surrounding new technology that's been created either for the courtroom, or new technology that is, maybe causing a problem out in the world.
Okay, so would you say that these are usually reactive to current events, or are they more forward-looking?
I think a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think that obviously current events definitely affect criminal justice every day,
mm-hmm.
but the advisory council does like to be forward-looking as much as possible. And in one of those forward-looking instances is when retention and recruitment, okay. And I think that the criminal justice area and prosecution specifically, we're not alone in that. Mm-hmm. In that difficulty sometimes, where it's hard to get young people fresh out of law school to look at public service as a career. And right. So most recently, the advisory council has been a little forward-looking in seeing what types of state programs or local programs or pipeline programs can be put in place in law schools and colleges, universities, both in Nevada and across the country, to educate students on the role of prosecutors in their communities, and how that can be a beneficial career for them.
Yeah, this definitely is an issue that's a lot of agencies throughout the state are feeling. I remember talking to DIDS about that. But so yeah, that's definitely the kind of issue you need to be proactive on.
Yes, absolutely.
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but is there anything else you can add? Like, can you walk us through an example of how changes in science and technology or crime trends have informed legislative proposals?
Absolutely. I'll give you two related to technology. One is cybercrimes. Over the last decade or so, different types of cybercrimes have really been prevalent in Nevada, whether we're talking about, maybe online scams. I think that has been covered a lot here in Nevada by our news stations, where especially older and vulnerable adults, are being taken advantage of by these online scammers, whether it's financial crimes, housing crimes, and just like it was new for the victims of those crimes, it was also new for prosecutors and how to prove those crimes in court. The evidentiary standards around, how to show a jury what this scheme looked like from the perspective of a victim, how to bring that technology into the courtroom and prove it up in an ethical way. And so there's been a lot of legislation in the last decade around sentencing requirements for cyber crimes. A lot of the perpetrators of these crimes, it's happening in Nevada, but those people don't exist in Nevada. Those people might exist in other states, or more problematically for prosecutors in other countries. And so finding these perpetrators and bringing them to court had been an issue before. The other one that is going on right now is crimes that use artificial intelligence. And the one that just the most recent legislative session that the advisory council helped tackle was crimes regarding child abuse and artificial intelligence. It's an unfortunate thing here in Nevada and all over the country where we're prosecuting individuals who are looking to exploit children, but now they're able to use artificial intelligence to do so. And so trying to figure out whether something is a picture of an actual child versus an artificially created, computer-generated image of a child, just that technology alone and how to bring that into a courtroom and prove it has been an obstacle that we have been overcoming in the last couple of years. And so legislation like that in the 2025 session is something that the advisory council took on.
That's really interesting. And I hadn't actually prepared this question, but so with the legislative process here in Nevada only meeting on a biennium schedule, they only meet every 2 years. How does the council respond to emergent issues like when the legislature only meets that often?
Sure. So then that's where the role of our judges come in. Just like it's new for prosecutors, it's definitely new for the judges too. And so we take our cues from the judiciary at that point and see, and whatever they are ruling is, what the bar is following. And it's based on those rulings is when the advisory council or a specific legislator makes a decision that the law needs to be changed based on these emergent technologies like artificial intelligence.
Okay, that's really interesting. So another goal of the council is promoting uniform administration of justice across Nevada. So why is that a challenge in Nevada?
Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Nevada geographically is a very diverse state. Over 80% of the state's population is in, the Las Vegas metro area. And the Clark County, the 8th District Judicial Court has, over 40 judges, and that the district attorney's office is the largest one in the state. And so a lot of our case law comes out of Clark County. But then you can move not very far north to Nye County, where their justices of the peace don't even need to be attorneys.
Right.
Any county with less than 100,000 people can elect justices of the peace, and they do not have to be practicing attorneys. And the cases that happen in front of those justices of the peace are just as important as cases that happen before, a robust judicial system, whether it's in Reno or Carson City or Las Vegas. And so the advisory council strives to make sure that the prosecutors, both in the urban jurisdictions and in the rural jurisdictions, one, have the resources necessary to be able to prosecute any type of crime, but even more importantly than the resources, the education to do so. A lot of the rural jurisdictions, those district attorneys' offices, the elected district attorney may be the only attorney in the office. It's an office of one.
Right.
And so if a double homicide happens in Esmeralda County, or, a financial crime happens in one of those small jurisdictions, that attorney or a new attorney that just started working in that office has never prosecuted that large of a case before,
Right.
And so the advisory council offers up their support and their advice to those prosecutors so that they have the knowledge necessary to, one, execute a successful prosecution, but more importantly, execute the fair administration of justice, no matter what that may be.
Right. So on this topic of urban versus rural jurisdictions, how does the council help bridge the differences between the urban and rural jurisdictions when it comes to prosecution practices and policies?
So my office, specifically in the executive director's office, will make sure that any training that I'm offering is sort of offered statewide. And obviously most recently that, usually looks like virtual trainings. And so I'll bring in experts both in Nevada and from across the country to provide trainings in new areas of prosecution. So for example, a couple months ago, I brought in some experts from the Zero Abuse Project, which is a nationwide nonprofit that looks to provide prosecution best practices for crimes against children. So a lot of those online crimes that I was talking about before related to child abuse or child exploitation, they came into the state and offered a 2-day intensive in-person training for all prosecutors in the state. And we had prosecutors from Clark County and White Pine County and Nye County come down to be able to learn from those industry experts and bring that knowledge back to their jurisdiction, because those those crimes against children aren't just happening in Las Vegas. Right. They're happening in Ely and they're happening in Elko. And so the best way to bridge that sort of urban-rural divide when it comes to prosecution is education.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this episode of All Out Nevada. We're always striving to bring you valuable insights and education, not just for judicial officers, but for anyone interested in the Nevada judiciary. If you find our content helpful or intriguing, please share your experience with your friends, family, and colleagues. Your support helps us reach a broader audience and ensures that more people can benefit from our discussions. Thank you for listening and supporting All Out Nevada. So, training and assistance for prosecutors is another statutory responsibility of the council. What does that look like? And from your perspective, how does that training ultimately affect what judges see in the courtroom?
Sure. So I think a lot of the education and training the advisory council provides is based off of how judges are operating their courtrooms, right. Because the legislature is a part-time legislature and only meeting 120 days. So judges in Nevada are, their pronouncements from the bench and their rulings affect how prosecutors operate on a day-to-day basis. And so one of the advisory council's, well, not one of, but the biggest training opportunity that we provide every year is I put on an annual prosecutors conference here in Nevada. It happens every September. It's a 3-day conference. It provides all of the continuing legal education that prosecutors need throughout the year. And one, it brings together, anywhere from 100 to 150 prosecutors from almost every jurisdiction in the state, whether it's prosecutors from the Attorney General's office, DA's offices, city attorneys' offices, brings them all together in one place for 3 days. And I provide a mix of both experts here in Nevada that may be very proficient in prosecuting domestic violence cases here in Nevada. And we do domestic violence prosecution training every year because it's so important. And often those trainings are based off of what prosecutors have seen over the past year happening in courtrooms and how to best adapt to what judges are ruling and ruling on evidentiary questions, not just the final ruling of a case. And I also bring in experts from across the country and other jurisdictions, because Nevada doesn't exist in a silo. We have 49 other states that we look to, and maybe those states are have new and interesting ways of prosecuting certain types of cases to really bring about that fair administration of justice ensuring victims, are receiving the right type of justice for the crimes committed against them. And so that annual conference is really sort of the precipice of the Advisory Council's training opportunities.
Okay, so you've mentioned how judges' actions kind of inform sometimes the council's actions. So is there anything that judges or court professionals, I guess, could better understand about the constraints, responsibilities, or coordination happening on the prosecution side at a statewide level?
Sure. The Advisory Council understands the role of judges in the state, from starting with, justices of the peace all the way up to justices here at the Nevada Supreme Court. And we really respect, honor, and appreciate the role that they play. Before any judge has, stepped up onto the bench, it's very, very likely that they were, many of them have been prosecutors or they were defense counsel. And so they come with their own perspectives onto the bench. And from the perspective of an active prosecutor, we want to have the same mindset where we are, whether you are a prosecutor or a judge or a public defender or private defense counsel, we're all there for the same goal. It's for the fair administration of justice in every courtroom here in Nevada. And so obviously, court is an adversarial system, and we always want to quote unquote win. But we always want judges to see the prosecution's perspective of a win might not be a win how you and I may understand it in day-to-day life. But a win for a prosecutor is making sure that, justice has been served in a specific case, no matter what that outcome may be.
Okay. So stepping back, a big thing, a very important thing is trust and confidence in the justice system. So how does this statewide coordination among prosecutors contribute to that?
The Advisory Council's goal is to have that public trust from every citizen of Nevada, whether you are a defendant in a case, the victim, the family member of a defendant, or the family member of a victim, or a member of the media, or just a member of the general public. The Advisory Council wants that person to be able to walk into a courtroom, experience a case from whatever perspective they may be experiencing it from, and have the utmost trust in the prosecutor that is prosecuting that case, no matter whether it's Vegas or Pahrump or Gerlach. We want that prosecutor to have all of the tools necessary to properly and fairly prosecute that case. And it's having that knowledge and that education and those resources, because that makes the prosecutor be able to do that. If the prosecutor is confident in their skills and in their knowledge, that confidence translates into the member of the general public having that confidence in that prosecutor.
Okay. So looking forward for the council, what emerging issues do you think will most shape the Advisory Council's work over the next coming years?
I think we've talked about them all already. I think that retention and recruitment is a huge one. There are a number of offices across the state, both urban and rural, that have a lot of vacancies right now, and being able to fill those vacancies with a pipeline, both from the Boyd School of Law at UNLV, but also from across the country, is really shaping the Advisory Council's work right now. The other one that we mentioned earlier is, new advents in technology. Those are happening on a daily basis. And for prosecutors keeping up with those is just as difficult as the general public trying to keep up with, new technologies on a daily basis. And the last one that we haven't mentioned yet is, attorney wellness. The role of a prosecutor is not an easy one. A prosecutor sees some really tough things every day.
Right.
The crimes that they're prosecuting, they're often, these cases are with them for months and years on a daily basis. And so they are seeing some very difficult things on a daily basis. And so the Advisory Council really takes seriously, makes it part of the conference every year, makes it part of their, their quarterly meetings to ensure that the Advisory Council is doing what we can to provide prosecutors the resources necessary to also take care of themselves.
That is an important point. I've talked to a lot of people through all levels of the judiciary, and that idea that vicarious trauma is a very real thing, and it can really impact people, their lives and their professions. So it's really important. So are there any misconceptions about prosecutors that members of the public could better understand?
I think that, the general public, and I'll put myself as a member of the general public in this bucket. Before I became a prosecutor, is we learn a lot about prosecution and the criminal justice system in our day-to-day lives, maybe from pop culture.
Right.
I think everyone knows if I played it right now, you would recognize the theme music to Law and Order, right. And those are great shows, but it may not be. It's not exactly what is happening in real life on a day-to-day basis in a courtroom here in Nevada. Prosecutors are not people who are just trying to bolster their quote-unquote win or loss record. When I go out and speak at different conferences or to different civic groups, a win for a prosecutor is the fair administration of justice, no matter what that looks like on paper, whether that is a person becoming incarcerated for heinous crimes, or whether that's someone who clearly has an addiction and the prosecutor working with the courts and the defense bar, getting that person into a diversion program in Nevada or into some sort of treatment. That is also a win. And so I always like to tell the general public it's not always watching someone walk out of a courtroom in handcuffs. It is having someone walk out of a courtroom with the tools necessary to make themselves a better and more productive member of the public.
That's great. I love that. So on the other end of that spectrum, what is important for judges to understand about the role of the advisory council, even if they've never interacted with it directly?
Sure. And that's probably most judges in Nevada. Most judges in Nevada probably haven't interacted with the advisory council directly, right, or even know it existed. So hopefully this podcast helps. The advisory council is really there to help, whether that is through providing information, just like I mentioned before about how the advisory council will provide information and expertise to the legislature. The advisory council is here also to help provide that information to judges, to the National Judicial College. And we're here as a partner, not as an adversary. We're here to make sure that courtrooms have all the knowledge they need from the perspective of a prosecutor to make sure that those courtrooms run smoothly.
So as we work to close out this episode, I am curious for you personally, what part of your work with the advisory council do you find the most fulfilling?
I love doing things like this. I think education, whether it's educating specifically the prosecutors at the annual conference or educating the listeners to this podcast, I have had the opportunity over the past 3 years to host delegations that the United States Department of State brings into the United States to learn about the American judicial system. Just a couple months ago, I hosted a delegation of judges, prosecutors, and other legal professionals from the Middle East that were here in Nevada on a sort of like 3-week tour of the United States to teach them about what the judicial system in Nevada looked like and how it operated. Just after that, and this was my favorite one, is I had a group of law students from African nations come in, and the questions that they had and sort of the aspirations that they had was very inspiring. And to be able to teach them about what Nevada does great and what Nevada is still working on related to our judicial system was very fulfilling.
Before I finally end the episode, is there any last things you wanted to share with the audience?
I would just like to plug the advisory council if anyone needs any information or assistance when it comes to information about prosecutorial work in Nevada or the criminal justice system in Nevada. You can find the Advisory Council's webpage on the website of the Nevada Attorney General. It has my personal contact information on there. Anyone is welcome to call or email me related to the work that the Advisory Council does, or who wants to maybe get involved in that sort of work.
Well, Mike, thank you again very much for joining me, and thank you for everything you do to serve the state, and your passion for the judiciary is evident the way you speak about it. So thanks again for everything, and thanks for coming to share your knowledge with the audience.
Thanks, Seth. This has been a pleasure.
A heartfelt appreciation to our guest and to everyone who has tuned into this podcast. Before we wrap up, here are a couple of quick important reminders. For continuing legal education credit, be sure to complete a certificate of attendance and email it to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, or comments, we welcome your input. You can email us at jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov or submit your topic ideas to the topic suggestion form linked in the episode description. We value and look forward to hearing from our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes of All Out Nevada. This is Seth Easley signing off. Take care, Nevada.